Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
Chris, welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be back, isn't it? We took I guess you would say, a little sabbatical over the last couple of months as we were tying up loose ends on, I guess, the spring semesters with our different institutions, and it kind of got a little hectic there for a while, and so we needed to take a pause.
Mhm.
Which was good, but it also keeps the fire going for both of us, and we're ready to get back in it. We had the opportunity to write down some interesting topics and some things that we want to talk about over the next little bit. So glad to get it back up and running.
Yeah, I mean it's been a while. I don't even remember what our last episode was on. I have to go look. But it has been a while, and I'm glad. We're sort of like the ghost on Poltergeist. We're back.
And either that's good or bad for our listeners. Though I did have
See,
several listeners who would reach out and say,
yeah,
"Hey, I really missed the podcast. I missed
yeah.
some of the things that you guys been talking about. When you going to get back in it?" And
Mhm.
I said, "It's going to be soon. It's going to be soon." So it kind of made us feel good. Let us know
Yeah.
that those brave souls that tune in each week to listen to some of the crazy thoughts that we have and some of the interesting topics. I appreciate their listening and appreciate their support. And it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's very good to be back. I tell you, the podcast is something that I've looked forward to and I've enjoyed. And I know Chris already knows this, but I've actually used a few of our episodes in classes, forced some of our students to listen to an episode or two. So, but they always seem to enjoy it. So I take that as a good thing. So
Absolutely. And, I think it's great that we kind of start back by talking about a topic that is probably foreign to many people. It might not, well, maybe it's not foreign, but it can be very confusing
mhm.
because the topic that we're talking about is actually a topic that we've already spoken about a while back. However, it's totally different.
Yeah, we're going to be talking today about the Washington Monument. Now, like Chris said, we have already talked about the Washington Monument. That was the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. This Washington Monument is in Maryland. And Chris, where did we get this idea from?
Yeah, so actually, the idea came from I actually was in Baltimore not too long ago and took I was just kind of traveling around, seeing some of the sights and sounds, and I've been to Baltimore before, and I've seen some of the touristy things, but I found my way in a very interesting place that is also extremely confusing, and that is there's a section of Baltimore, Maryland, that is known as Mount Vernon, which is interesting since that's the home place of George Washington. And that there was this beautiful monument right there in the center of the square that is really the first major architectural monument that was built to honor George Washington. So all of a sudden, I thought, what a great podcast episode this is because it's the Washington Monument, it's Mount Vernon, and it is has nothing to do with the Mount Vernon where George Washington lived, nor the Washington Monument we've talked about in Washington D.C.
In fact, this Washington Monument, the Washington Monument in Baltimore, was completed before the Washington Monument in D.C. So this is the original, the OG Washington Monument.
It is the OG, and what's fascinating by this is that this monument is an engineering marvel because they did it without any modern construction equipment. And as it's going up, the people in the area were scared because, I mean, here you have this huge monument that is going to be about 180 feet tall. And they thought these guys don't know what they're doing. And they were scared that the monument was going to be like the Leaning Tower of Pisa and would actually fall into their home. And I mean, it's got a very large base to it.
Yeah.
And one of the whole things about that base is it was designed to be like a gallery, a place where you could gather. And what's also interesting is that this monument can still be climbed today. It is open to the public, and there are 227 steps. There's no elevator, there's no quick up and down, but to be able to get to the top, you have to climb circular stairs all the way to the top. But Ray, when you do get to the top, you have a very unique view of Baltimore. Basically, looking surrounding the historic neighborhood of Mount Vernon and being able to take you for a 360-degree view of just what the city looks like in Baltimore. And what's interesting about this is that it was designed simply for the glorification of George Washington long before he even passes away at his home of Mount Vernon. And you have this once again. You have this group of individuals who are so grateful and so thankful for the work that George Washington has done, that they want to be able to create a memorial, a monument that will always be remind people of the work of Washington.
Yeah, and like you said, this a monument in Baltimore honoring George Washington um really went back to his life. There was, even when Washington was alive, there was ideas about honoring George Washington, that kind of thing. Now, George Washington died, of course, in December of 1799. So it wasn't too many years later that the idea for this particular monument came up. It was first proposed sometime around 1807, I believe it is, where they first proposed putting up this monument, and it was in Baltimore. And at this particular time, Baltimore, I think, was like the second or third largest city in America at this particular point. So they look at getting funding for this project, and if you look at the monument itself, it's going to be expensive to get the stone, to get everything that is necessary for this project to put it together. So the money for this came from a commission, and they put together this commission, and private donations were given, and all sorts of things were done to get the money for this project. Chris, it's not like it is today. You know, today you can put together a grant application, and you can get the money you need pretty quickly if you can do a grant application. But this was something, of course, it took a little while to sort of get the plane off the ground, as it were.
Yeah, to get the plane off the ground. And one of the things that they were considering is, I mean, first of all, you have Baltimore, which was this up and coming rising town, and the reality is that the people in Washington really didn't want a sculpture or a monument or anything. They had enough going on as it was. And so Baltimore says, yeah, we'll kind of step in, and this is something that will kind of put us on the map, if you will. And so what they decide to do is to have a competition, a
Yep.
contest. And once again, if our listeners go back and kind of review our episode on the Washington Monument in DC, they'll see some of the first things that was there. And I think it was going to be like a $500 prize
Yep.
to build the monument, right? If you were selected with the grand planned, if you will, you would get a prize. And Ray, it's interesting that the person who was awarded the opportunity to build the monument is someone that we are familiar with. And the reason that he advocated to be the first one is because he said he was the first native born American who was an architect, who had architectural training. And he was also the one who designed another monument, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. But what I want to go back to something you said there, and I see it in my notes as well. The person who won the design prize, they got to design it and to build it, they would get a prize of $500, which I know $500 today versus $500 then is two different things. But the estimated cost to build the monument was $100,000. So it's like, here, we'll give you $500, but you're going to have to spend $100,000 to build this thing. Now, of course, it didn't have to come out of his project. Like I said earlier, they were going to get the money from various sources to actually source the construction of this monument. But you know, that's not a lot of money. The $500 prize is not a lot of money for someone who is, going to be awarded a contract to design and build this structure. And Mills, of course, he won that contest and he got it.
Well, and I think something to go along with that, yeah, sure, is winning a $500 prize, but you're gonna be the first one who
Yeah.
has who will be remembered as building this memorial. And, we kinda go back and recognize that, the old Confederation Congress, had actually first, promoted the idea of creating this memorial and really wanting to build something to honor George Washington and everything that he had done. But it wasn't working out. And so here's a guy that says, wait a second, I can get $500, but more importantly, my name will be known throughout the ages. And by building this and building it so well and for it to be so memorable, gave him the opportunity when Washington D.C. actually said, hey, now is the time to build a monument. Well, it gave him the opportunity to step right in and say, hey, look what I did just a few miles down the road.
Yeah, he would later go on, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, I think the construction of this project and the construction of the other project sort of began to parallel at different points.
Yeah, he was chosen to begin, or he was chosen in like 1814, and he laid that first cornerstone, if you will, on July 4th, 1815. So kind of in the same time period as the Washington Monument will get started.
Yeah, they do. They laid that cornerstone there in Baltimore on July 4, 1815. Yeah, so that's I mean, if you think about it, 1807, 1808 to 1815, they're moving pretty quick on this project. Um, and of course the plans are changing as time goes on. They're updating the plans. Um, now I
And
did,
I think it's interesting that the structure begins to be built, and there is a lot of work that's being done with this. I mean, this is a very active memorial while it's being constructed. And you have people that are interested in this because it's really the first one. I mean, and so people are hearing, hey, they're building this memorial down in Baltimore and it's going to be in George Washington. And so you've got people wanting to come by and visit. I read somewhere that President James Monroe came to this
yeah,
Baltimore for something, and he said, "Hey, by the way, I want to
want to see
swing by
that
and check out this."
construction site. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and then uh, what then happens? People start leaving things because they want to say, "Hey, I was here. I saw this being built. I experienced this," and it's just one of those must see attractions, if you will, during this particular time.
yeah, and if you look at the building, I mean, I'm constant, and I probably said this in our other episode on the other Washington Monument. I'm constantly amazed by these type of construction projects that were done. I mean, okay, I think they would have a hard time in the 21st century putting together a project like this, but they put it together and built it in a pretty short period of time, and it includes way up, way up, way up on its tippity top. It includes a statue of George Washington. Can you see it from the ground very well?
It's very hard to see. I believe that statue that is up there is representative, and I think I'm right about this, is of him resigning
Yeah,
his military commission. Is that right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so when he's turning reading his letter, turning in his resignation after the Revolutionary War had ended.
But I mean, this thing's 200 feet in the air, and it's one of the things when I was up there in Baltimore and I was looking at this thing, First of all, it's very small. The circular um, stairwell, if you will, is very, very tight.
Hmm.
And of course, there's no air conditioning or anything like that. So, you're doing this very carefully circular movement to get up. And when you get to the top, I mean, Ray, the older I get, the more and more I do not like heights,
Right.
but it presents a beautiful view of, the city, but also it's a reminder that here is this fearless leader who was willing to sacrifice, all that he was, to make sure that America was free, and that America would be a nation that would survive on the basis of, freedom, and of course what documents would say: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so it is absolutely beautiful to see the amount of intricate detail that was done by this. That statue that's up top was carved by a sculptor, something that you would see, if you look at David, and other things that Michelangelo did. I
Yep.
mean, you have this huge thing. So, Ray, once again, how'd they get that up there? It was they didn't use modern construction equipment. So you see all of these things. I'm just amazed, as you say, of how they built it.
Yeah, I don't know how they built it. I mean, I'm not, you wouldn't hire me to build your doghouse. So, I'm not someone who knows anything about construction, but just the level of artistry, the level of design and architecture that went into this building is quite amazing. And one thing, um, Chris, that our listeners might find interesting is why Maryland? Why Maryland?
Well, you kind of got to go back to the Maryland has a significant role in the American Revolutionary War. Maryland has even after that, when you have there's a place there, and I'm trying to say it's not Fells Point, but it overlooks the harbor, where you see the cannons that are still available of how the individuals continued to keep the British from approaching Washington D.C. What was that? The War of 1812, I think,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
when it was.
Yeah, and so all that happened while this statue was being built. That I hadn't even thought about that. That the War of 1812 and all that is going on while this statue is being built. I didn't see anything in my notes talking about that, how that war impacted the construction, but I'm sure it did. Uh,
Yeah, there was something. I'm trying to remember where it was that I saw, but it was, oh, I cannot remember, but there was a significant battle that took place as it was being built, and they had the stairs, it was partially built, if you will. And so there were people who would kind of go up and would be able to observe some of the things that were happening around the city, if you will, to keep the British from, I guess, being successful in their invasion.
Yeah, going back to what I asked earlier about why Maryland. Maryland played a very important role in the American Revolution. It also played a very important role in George Washington's life. It was there in Maryland, in the Maryland State House, where George Washington, in the old Senate chamber there, where he submitted his resignation to the Congress. And it was there in Annapolis, Maryland, where Congress ratified the Treaty of Paris, which ended the American Revolution. So um, this is a spot that was very important in the life of George Washington and in the life of the nation. Is this is the point where he sort of steps away from the army, he steps away from his duties to go back to Mount Vernon, but also the place where the United States, I guess you could say, in 1776, the United States declared its independence. In the war, it won its independence. And there in the Maryland Capitol building, it achieved its independence.
And when they had the memorial service, to dedicate it, if you will, it was declared that the monument, quote, was to be a memorial of the blessings and advantages that our country derived from the character of and the conduct of that personage whose name it is to bear and whose virtues it is to perpetuate. And so you stop and you think that this, and I don't want to say hero worship, it's a little strong, but the pride and the thanksgiving that people had for General Washington, and for the work that he did to keep the nation going even when it was at its lowest. Even to this day, when you think about it, you have a Washington monument in Mount Vernon in Baltimore, Maryland. It just shows that every part of George Washington was respected and revered and appreciated by people. And this is long before telephones and computers and communication. I mean, this was word of mouth of what they had heard about how this individual truly helped form a nation.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, absolutely it does. And I was gonna mention here real quick, sort of moving it to the modern period. You're talking about, adoration and that kind of thing for Washington and all that. They actually have lighting ceremonies around Christmas for this monument, which must be quite a spectacular thing. The first one was held in 1971, but they have an entire Christmas celebration, and at the end of the celebration, the monument is lit, which is probably a very amazing thing to see, this monument be lit up in Christmas lights or however they light it up.
It was interesting that I had made this a point that I wanted to go see it, and so I went up close and was observing this masterpiece, if you will, of a memorial. And I was in Mount Vernon in the district, and there's a church right behind it, and there's a lot of townhouses, and there's a library. It's called the Peabody Library by Johns Hopkins University right beside it. It's just a quaint, beautiful um, little neighborhood, if you will. Well, I then went towards the Inner Harbor and then towards Camden Yards to watch a baseball game. And as I was walking back from Camden Yards from the baseball game, which is probably, I don't know if you were driving it, it's probably a mile or so.
Right.
Ray, I came across the block, if you will, and I turned my head and I saw, I mean, probably 15 blocks away, there was the Washington Monument. It was nighttime now, and it was lit up.
Hmm.
And it was absolutely beautiful from that far away. It to me stood as the centerpiece of Baltimore,
Right.
just a reminder. I mean, and I go back now and I think that here's this thing that was built over 200 and some years ago, and I look at it and I'm just thinking, my gosh, what a masterpiece from such a far distance away. So imagine back in the day how beautiful it was.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, as you were saying, I don't know if you've said it on air already, but we were talking before the program started that when you went, it was too hot to go into the actual tower itself because of the heat wave we've been having lately.
Yeah, it was. I mean, you can imagine it would be. I
Like an
mean,
oven.
yeah, that's a great term for it. And so it was closed, but it when I was there, and I mean, Ray, you have to say, and I touched it. I didn't get a
Yeah.
chance to go in there, but as a historian, you said, man, I was there. I was able to
Yeah.
touch it, and it's not big if width wise and things like that, but it's big when you stop and you think.
Yeah.
Someone had the ingenuity and the brains that said, "This marks the spot where we will forever memorialize an individual who helped bring about a nation right here, right now." And then how the city kind of built around that statue, that monument is, and then lead to Washington D.C. saying, "Well, now we want one.
You want
We want something." And so I think
No,
it's just
from just a point of view of architecture I think this one I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this. I need to stop. But I think this one almost looks nicer than the one in DC. I mean, the one in DC is very nice and very pretty. But
But
this
it's kind of plain though.
yeah, it's
The
sort of
one in
plain.
Washington,
This one,
this has got the base, it's
yeah,
got, Washington up top. I mean, and here's the thing. The Washington Monument is right next, door to some of the most sacred places in Washington D.C. and also
right.
some of the most protected. I mean, you can't just walk up to the Washington Monument and say, "Hey, I'm gonna go
No,
walk up." Here in Baltimore, at the Washington Monument, $6 gets you up the 200, and 77
yeah.
steps if you want it, and no security. It's not like you have to go. I mean, it's just a simple reminder of the simpler days, and but also it's I don't know. I just want to say it's beautiful. It's
Yeah,
it's
it is.
it's simple, beautiful, and I think it's not out of touch, but it's out of the way. I mean, you gotta find it, and then when you find it, you're like, "I'll never forget this." It's
Yeah.
beautiful,
Yeah, it's got, I guess you could say it's got character. It's got personality.
and that's the best way to put it. Yes,
It's just
that's it.
this is a very nice building.
Yep.
And I love the church in the background. That's very very nice
Yeah,
addition.
there's so much you could say about that, and I'd love to do some history on the church also.
Yeah.
It was I think I got a picture of it, and it was a Methodist church, I believe, is what it is, and but it was absolutely huge, very large, but it's just a quaint place that I encourage our readers to do, our listeners to kind of go online, look at it, see a picture of it, and just appreciate the structure and the way that it was built.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Another great episode, first in a while, of History You Didn't Know But Should. We're back. Please spread the word to your family and friends. Make sure to leave us ratings when you listen on Spotify. Rate the podcast, share the podcast so that we can get word out that we're back and we're talking history yet again. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
We'll talk to you later.